that you can protect minorities, or the main way, or an important way, is and I use the term minority very loosely, you understand, right? Is by limiting free speech and having anti-hate laws or anti-hate speech laws. Really, that in my view is indicative of a very low opinion of the intelligence, the intellect, and the dedication to tolerance and fairness, and etc. That our citizens, individual citizens in our societies have. That somehow or other we feel that if they're exposed to this, then my God, they're going to be radicalized, and they're going to go off and they're going to do whatever it is that they might do. I don't have that low opinion of people, especially in our country, in our society. I think that we were raised in small L liberal societies. I think that although we may not be able to articulate our values so well sometimes, I think that innately that they're there, and I just don't believe that when people hear this kind of thing, that they really go on. One very last comment on this though. If it's true that hate speech can incite this kind of behavior, then it's equally true that anti-hate speech, that is to say, the ability to speak one's mind in the opposite of hate. In other words, to say, what you're saying is hateful, and it's a stupid thing for you to say. And when people speak out like that, surely to goodness, that kind of response is as effective in influencing the citizenry as the hate speech would be. But here's the final thought. When we have laws that proscribe speech, today we define hate speech in one way. But once we accept the fact that it's within the purview of government to decide what is and is not proper speech, then we're opening the door to someday somebody saying, when I stand up and say, that is hate speech, and I don't want to hear that, okay? If I'm talking down an example, I'll give this later on. But we open the door to that, okay? And I think that that's far more dangerous than ultimately than tolerating, a few quacks out there that have terrible, ignorant, and hateful things to say about their fellow human beings.
I would like to congratulate you on the World Series win yesterday. Mazel tov for what you did for the Boston Red Sox.
You've managed to do what very few people do to me, leave me speechless. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Didn't I see you on TV last night?
Oh, with beer, you mean? Yeah, no facial profile of beer.
Okay, Terry, do you have something to add?
It's funny, but this is something, is this working? No.
The moment? Oh, there it is. Fred and I were actually talking about this yesterday, and when Joseph came in this evening, he raised the question too. How are we going to have a panel or a debate on free speech? Somebody going to take the position, well, okay, I'm against it, and then everybody else is for it, and then we have a bit of an argument. And we were actually quite seriously wondering, what is it that we can sort of disagree about when we're talking about free speech? And it strikes me now that we actually can probably disagree on a couple of things, and that is, I think, for instance, we might all agree that there are thresholds that cannot be crossed, whether it's immediate incitement to violence or malicious libel. And my own views have actually evolved on this quite a bit. I came into these conversations as a supporter of human rights law that presented the opportunity to by statute, kind of sanction hate speech. And I've changed my mind over the years quite a bit on this subject, and I've moved to quite a libertarian position on it, if I can put it that way. But on the question of libel, curiously, as a journalist, I've gone in the opposite direction. Libel law in this country is, the trend has been to significantly reduce the opportunity, actually, for individuals to pursue libel against news organizations before the courts. A couple of years ago, there was a decision, I think the Toronto Star was the leading plaintiff in it, in which the effect of the Supreme Court judgment was that in matters of the public interest, news organizations, journalists were not were not obliged to be as assiduous about fact-checking and fairness and confirmation of fact and assertion of fact as had been previously the case. And I object to this, actually, and strangely, as a journalist, I'm a sort of a minority among my peers on this question. Because my experience as a working journalist has been, whenever your copy has to be lawyered, what happens is the first question isn't, is this true? The first question that the lawyer will ask is always, does this guy, is he going to sue? Does he have the money? That's what it usually comes down to. And so we, I think, are moving quite dangerously in this country to a situation in which if you don't have the means to engage law firms and protect and defend and advance your interests against malicious libel or what you take to be malicious libel. In other words, if you're just a working person, then you're fair game. You can be lied about. You can be slandered. And I'm troubled by this. But on the question of how do you quarantine? This is something I think that I'm perplexed about, and I don't have an answer to, and I'd like to return this to my fellow panelists. Is where do you draw the line? How is that line drawn? I can take it as a given that the most effective way to quarantine toxic speech is to confront it. But is there also not a point where incitement to racial hatred or violence, incitement to violence, that would put people immediately at risk? It seems to me the line might be drawn around there somewhere, and I'm curious to know as well what the implications of digital technologies and the immediacy of these of speech that some people might consider to be hateful or inciting speech or slanderous speech, whether or not just the function of the internet and the function of digital technologies in the communications revolution has actually put sort of the villagers with torches at the front doorstep of the object of anger, right? Globally now, whereas before you actually had to sort of physically do that. So that's something I'm really curious to know is how much consensus is there among the panelists about on the question of that there is a line that must be drawn, and where and how do we draw those kinds of lines?
If we take the Skokie example, let's imagine that the Nazis had marched through the streets of Skokie, then they would have been allowed to do so. But if they went to the synagogue and said, let's go get the Jews and kill them or attack them, then that would certainly be incitement that should be prosecuted. Again, of course, I don't think you can ever have a legal system where the rules are so clear as you'll never have hard cases. But I think you will significantly reduce the legal uncertainty and arbitrariness if you have standards such as incitement to violence. Then you can have discussions on how immediate must the incitement be. But I certainly agree that threats and incitement to violence is where you should draw the line. And I was very happy with what you said about and I'd like to hear more of your thoughts about the sort of where you disagree on the sort of the standard line where you say, well, look at what happened in Nazi Germany, because one of the interesting things is that Julius Streicher, for instance, he was twice convicted. He was sent to prison. Das Stürmer was confiscated on numerous occasions, and he was celebrated as a hero when he was taken out of prison, and his court proceedings, he used them to become this martyr in it's also interesting that the last genocide in Europe took place in Bosnia. And in the former Yugoslavia, there were very, very harsh hate speech laws, up to 10 years imprisonment for speaking out against the other population groups in Yugoslavia. And it seems to me that that was not an efficient way to nurture tolerance. And what we know from, that there's a very interesting study from Pew that Pew Research did in 2011. It didn't look at hate speech laws, but it looked at blasphemy laws and laws against religious defamation, and it shows that there's a correlation, I'm not saying causation, but correlation in those countries that enforce such laws. There's a much higher level of social violence based on religion than in countries that don't enforce these laws. So that goes back to countering the narrative that we ensure social peace through restricting free speech. I don't think there's a lot of evidence. But having said that, if you could convincingly show that we could avoid, a new genocide somewhere, then I would accept limits on free speech. But so I wouldn't take the principal position and say, well, we have to suffer a new Holocaust for the sake of free speech. But I simply don't think that's a solid case to be made.
I'd like to ask the panel a question about in Vancouver. There were bus ads that were taken out by anti-Israel people showing the disappearing state of Palestine. And those ads were very offensive to some people, and there was debate on whether those ads should be accepted. Those ads were rejected by the Toronto Transit Commission. What are your views on these sort of ads? Should they be allowed, not allowed? Is that just a private decision? Is there a public part to that decision? Anybody? Sir? Joseph?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding too extreme or too offensive, we have the land, we have the guns. I really don't give a damn what bus ads are on. Really. If the are there any reporters in the room? Right. Yeah, that's not certain. I guess it's too late to say we're off the record here. Yeah, no, seriously.